Hello everyone and welcome back to more Umineko When They Cry. So, we're here, everybody's having like a little meet-up before, I guess, the official family meeting. And Shannon's making a fool of herself in front of all the guests, which is upsetting Natsuhi very much. There's been suggestion of poisoning the tea as well, which is what we're currently talking about here.
わしはその毒舌を毎日聞かされとるからもう毒に耐性がついてしもたわ。エヴァもわし相手には構わんが耐性のない相手にはちと加減せんとな。
あらあらひどい。シャノンちゃんにお茶の知識を教えてあげただけじゃない。
Well, you're not really teaching her about tea, you're teaching her about poison. Everyone followed the lead set by Hideyoshi's horse laugh and chuckled, though not easily. Only Natsuhi didn't join in, but for the time being, the conversation inside the parlour could now be mistaken for a lively and friendly chat. Well, it's not going to take too much to sway it the other way, apparently. As Shannon finally finished setting the tea table and tried to leave, Kirie apologised to her in a low voice for not being able to help. Well, you did try. Shannon gave a light bow and made a hasty retreat. Shannon cast her eyes downwards and as she pushed the cart down the corridor. Anyone seeing the pitiful way she looked might easily conclude that she'd been bullied in some way.
気を落とさないで。姉さんは何も悪くない。
見てたのね。
そういうお役目だから。奥様もエヴァ様も地獄へ落ちろ。でもそれより卑劣なのはあいつだ。
Canon glared hatefully in the opposite direction of the parlour. The preparations for the tea had been delayed by some trifling problems in the kitchen. These problems were not Shannon's fault. In fact, it had been Goda's mistake. Oh, so it appears that Canon does have some sort of hatred for Goda, which is pretty understandable considering how their relationship appeared in the last video. After all, there was no way a show-off like Goda would give up a flashy job like bringing in tea when the guests arrived. He had ended up wasting time preparing the tea once again. So, when he realised he wouldn't be able to score any points for this job, he pushed the task of setting the table on Shannon, who happened to be passing by. Oh, poor Shannon. I feel really sorry for her, she's having such a tough time so far. You might call it a clever move on his part, but there could be no doubt that it was a cowardly one.
いいの。ありがとう、カノン君。私、全然気にしていないし。
Canon's silence vividly expressed the distance between Shannon's words and how she actually felt.
カノン君だけでも分かってくれたんで、ちょっと心が楽になったかな。
姉さんは心にいろいろ溜め込みすぎる。たまには自分に優しくしてあげて。
So is she actually his sister, or is it just kind of like a reference to, you know, a woman that he has respect for? I don't know.
ありがとうね。
Suddenly, they both felt someone's presence and whirled around. A middle-aged man stood there. It was Genji, the head servant.
そこで何をしている?
はい、失礼いたしました。
Shannon humbly obeyed and promptly made to push the cart and leave. However, Canon appealed to Genji in silence, bearing something in his eyes that he could not express in words.
どうした? 何かあったか?
シャノンは何も悪くないのに、あいつら。
やめて、カノン君。失礼しました。すぐに仕事に戻ります。カノン君も自分の持ち場に戻って。お願い。
姉さんがそう言うなら。
何事もないならそうしなさい。
はい、失礼します。
From the shadows in the hallway, an old woman wearing an apron watched over them. It was Kumasawa. Poor Shannon-san, Kanon-san. There's no reason for those two to be picked on.
しかしゴーダさんに嫌われているのは紛れもない事実。ゴーダさんは後宮本家へいらっしゃられるまでどこかの立派なホテルにお勤めだったそうです。そこで身につけられたというお仕事ぶりはそりゃ大したものだとは思います。ただゴーダさんはここでは最も年季の短い使用人。ご自身のそれまでの積み重ねによるプライドもあられたのでしょう。
Because Shannon-san and Kanon-kun are his seniors here at the mansion, and yet are inexperienced and have gone through much less in life than he has. He picks on them at every chance he
ま
gets.
た気の毒なことに夏日奥様にも嫌われております。もちろん年季という意味では奥様の方が長くこの家におられます。ただこればかりは奥様にも同情しなくてはなりません。本当に親方様も罪作りな方でございます。ご自身のちょっとした気まぐれが奥様にこれほどまでの劣等感をお与えになるとは。もちろん奥様とて内心はあの二人に辛く当たる言われは何もないことを重々承知してはおります。しかしそれが理屈で分かっているからといってどうにもならないのが人の心。ああ、ほいたわしや。私には何もできずこうして物陰から見守ることしかできないのです。
The four of us cousins were enjoying our stories, just shooting the breeze. Anyway, there were both girls and guys here. Plus, we had people over a wide spread of ages, adult, high school, and elementary school. Even if we just talked about our own lives, the other three kept listening attentively.
なんかやっと馴染んできたぜ。ジェシカもマリアも6年前からは想像もつかないくらい成長しちまったからよ。正直なところ少しだけ違和感を持ってたんだが、こうして話をしているうちに中身はあの頃から何も変わってないことが分かったぜ。
Well, I imagine the change in Maria must be extremely obvious. Obviously, she was only 3, I think, the last time they saw each other, so a lot can change in that time.
同じ言葉を返してやるよ。バートラだって6年ぶりだってのに全然変わってねえぜ。図体がいくらでかくなっても中身は相変わらずお子様だってことだな。マリアもお子様、マリアもお子様。
マリアだっていつまでもお子様じゃねえぞ。
She can be a kid forever if she
お
wants.
子様から可愛いお姫様に成長してくんだからな。そうしたらまな板みてえな胸もすぐジェシカ並みになるぞ。そしたら揉ませてくれよ、約束だぞ。
This is a really dodgy conversation. I mean, she's still a child. Even if you are talking about the future, it's a bit... I don't know, it's a bit off.
揉ませる。約束する。
You're not supposed to be excited about this.
ダメだよマリアちゃん。そんな約束しちゃダメ。
約束したから揉ませる。
She's gonna regret that one when she's older.
マリア、お前本当に素直ないい子だな。お前と結婚する未来の旦那さんはきっと幸せ者だぜ。
っていい話にすり替えつつ約束を保持してんじゃねえぜ。マリア、その約束はなしなし。
約束取り消し。
やっぱりバトラ君も揃って4人で集まらないといとこが集合した気がしなかったね。この6年はやっぱり寂しかったよ。
そうだな。こういうふざけた話にはならなかったな。でも建設的な話はできてたと思ったぜ。将来に対する心構えとか受験とか就職とかよ。
悪うございましたね。俺が来たらおまぬけなドタバタばっかりでよ。
でもマリアは今年のが楽しい。
そうだね。僕も同感。今年が一番楽しいよ。
Maria's sincere words probably spoke for everyone present. George and Nikki stroked Maria's head, and she giggled like a happy kitten.
失礼いたします。お食事のご用意ができました。
A timid knocking sound and the equally timid voice of a young woman came through the door. Jessica answered brightly.
シャノン、入れよ。
Oh, George, it's Shannon.
覚えてるだろ。
Jessica stood up from the bed and opened the door. There stood a servant girl who must have been about our age.
ご無沙汰いたしております。バトラ様、6年ぶりでございます。シャノンです。
Trembling a little as she noticed me, she bowed deeply.
ジェシカにも驚かされたが、シャノンちゃんにも驚かされたぜ。あんたもすっかり美人になったじゃねえのよ。
もったいないお言葉。強烈に。
しかしよ、この島じゃよっぽど食事の栄養価が高いんじゃねえのか。何を食ってどこを鍛えたらそんなにでっかいお胸になるんだか。
Why, Battler, do you want huge boobs as well?
ジェシカとどっちがでけえかちょいと触って確かめさせてもらうぜ。
I don't think George will take too kindly to that somehow. With both hands poised and saliva dribbling from my mouth, I closed in. For the sake of justice and my personal honour, I'd like to point out that I don't suffer from some strange disease that makes my lymph nodes itch until I scratch my neck open, and which can only be prevented by fondling breasts. This is just a battler-style method of communication. Women must not take very kindly to him. If I slowly close in on her like this, odds are 8 or 9 out of 10 that I get slapped or clobbered, right? So I can use this Battler-sama original technique to spark a gag like that and break the ice. Well, it also means I really do get to touch them on that 1 in 10 chance though, right? Like that'd ever happen. Wow, that's a real close-up there. At that point, my hands were less than a centimetre away from Shannon-chan's boobs, but the counter-strike had yet to come. She blushed and lowered her head in embarrassment when she realised what was going on. But she just stood there, with both hands politely joined in front of her, not even trying to resist or cover her breasts. Does this happen often to her? Hey, I wasn't planning on this. Please, hit me right now or I'm seriously gonna... Which is why I was glad that Jessica chose that time to drive her elbow into the back of my head.
ジェシカ、ありがとうよ。
なんで私が感謝されんだ。
いやいや、すまんぜシャノンちゃん。魅力的な胸に思わず吸着されそうになっちまった。つうか、さすがにあの間合いまで来たら犯罪確定だろ。ダメだぜ、抵抗しなきゃよ。
バトラ様は大切なお客様ですし。
So she just lets important guests fondle her?
あのな、お客様でも犯罪は犯罪。女の子の胸はだいたい10センチくらいからが防空識別圏だな。2センチ圏まで侵入してきたらこれはもう領空侵犯だぜ。スクランブル発進で即ビンタを食らわせてやれ。
そんなことできません。私たちは家具ですし。
Of course she didn't want her breasts touched, but if a guest so desired, she was prepared to sacrifice herself to suit their wants. A girl like this needs some urgent protection.
今時こんな献身美徳な子がいるとは軽いめまいすら覚えるぜ。でもダメだ、ダメなんだ。俺がいやらしい顔で迫る。ハッタウスいやエッチ、そういうお約束じゃないとオチがつかねえんだよ。頼むよ、お願いでよ。俺を引っ叩いてくれよ。こうバチンとバチンと。
Anyway, why isn't George protecting her?
お願いは聞けません。家具ですから。でも命令ならお聞きします。それが務めですから。
じゃあ命令させてもらうことにするよ。次からバトラ君が胸に触ろうとしてきたら平手打ちで反撃すること。いいね。
はい、仰せつかりました。以後そのようにさせていただきます。バトラ様、ご承知おきくださいませ。
Shannon-chan announced this while bowing elegantly to me. Her expression was radiant. I gave her a thumbs up to show her I was fine with that.
6年前はお手伝いさんの連れ子がついでにお手伝いみたいな印象だったんだけど、すっかり一人前の使用人さんだな。今年で何年になるんだ？
はい、おかげさまで10年ほどお使いさせていただいております。
I don't know if I would call it a pleasure so far. She's bleh. The kanji for her name are read as Shannon. Now here's another name that's far from typical for a Japanese person. Back in the day, I was a kid myself, so I accepted her name without paying it much attention. Thinking about it now though, her name's pretty unusual, even though she's not a member of the Ushiromiya family. Maybe it's like a servant's professional name, or something. If so, that might explain why her name's so similar to Kanon-kun, that kid I met earlier in the rose garden. She's a long-term servant who served here since she was 6 years old. Her appearance had changed so much that I couldn't match her to the person of my memories, but we both knew each other 6 years ago. That shy part of her had always been there, but she did seem to have developed the allure you'd expect of a girl her age. Especially in her breasts, yes.
さっき会ったカノン君は彼女の弟なんだよ。
弟というわけでは。でも私のことを姉と慕ってくれます。何か失礼なことはしませんでしたか？
相変わらずいつも通りだぜ。もうちょっと愛想よくすればいいのによ。もったいな。
カノン君がご迷惑をおかけしたようで申し訳ございません。
別に迷惑なんか何も。同じ男としてわかるさ。ありゃ気難しい年頃だ。愛想が悪いのは当たり前だぜ。
マリアもよく言われる。愛想悪いって言われる。
She doesn't seem very unsociable, to be honest.
カノンと一緒。マリア様は愛想悪くなんかありません。一緒が良かった。
食事の準備ができたんだっけ？
はい、失礼いたしました。お食事のご用意が整いましたので、皆様をお屋敷へご案内いたします。
Shannon bowed again formally and returned to her duty mode. We realised that if we made her stick around for any more light conversation, it would actually make it harder for her to do her job. We got off our butts to avoid interfering with her work any further.
じゃあお屋敷に行こうか。みんなもお腹が空いてたところでしょ。
だな。ゴーダさんがいる時の飯は楽しみなんだよ。あの人どこぞの有名ホテルでシェフをやってたらしくて、かなり料理の腕があるんだぜ。
ほうほう、それ楽しみ。行こうぜマリア。ガツガツ犬みたいに食い散らかすぞ。
犬みたいに食い散らかす。
ダメダメ。バトラ君の言うことはいちいち真に受けちゃダメだよ。全部冗談なんだから。さあ、行こう行こう。
Well, that wasn't exactly a bad joke. Under Shannon Chan's guidance, we headed towards the mansion. Met once again by the magnificent rose garden, we continued onward, as the intimidating mansion of the Ushiromiya head family came into view. It had apparently been built shortly after the war, so you could feel the dignity of almost a half-century hanging about it. The building was gorgeous on the surface, but old as it was, equipment such as its AC and heating were apparently quite frail. According to Jessica, midwinter was especially tough, what with all the drafts. But they're so wealthy, you'd think they could fix that sort of thing. Haven't these people ever heard of a kotatsu? As we entered the entrance hall, an aged servant greeted us. Now him I remembered. Genji-san, who had been working here longer than anyone, filled the role of head servant.
バトラ様、お久しゅうございます。
As our eyes met, he greeted me with a calm, composed voice. His bow wasn't as graceful or refined as Goda's, but despite its simplicity, it communicated his feelings very well.
源氏さん、本当にお久しぶりっす。お元気そうですね。
おかげさまで健やかに過ごさせていただいております。バトラ様こそご立派になられました。親方様の若き日に少し似てこられましたな。
I don't think he'll be very happy about that, to be honest.
俺がじい様にってことは、さぞやじい様は若い頃モテたろうな。
Even though Battler already admitted that he wasn't popular with the ladies.
ここからはシャノンに代わって私がご案内申し上げます。どうぞこちらへ。
Shannon-chan bowed deeply and watched us leave. After that, we headed towards the dining room under Genji-san's guidance. Genji-san, just like Kumasawa-san, stood in stark contrast to us young people who had grown beyond recognition over the last 6 years. His appearance was exactly the same as in my memories from 6 years ago. It was as though time had stopped since the last time we met. Genji-san was an extremely quiet and diligent person. He was basically grandfather's close aide or caregiver, and you might even call him grandfather's companion of many years. In fact, it seems he was by grandfather's side even more often than my late grandmother was. According to Jessica, grandfather trusted him more than any of his blood relatives. But I wonder how long he served. I never got the details, but I heard something about him being here since the very beginning, when his mansion was first constructed. Which would mean that he's dedicated half of his life to serving here. It's easy to see why he's so trusted. As we passed through a massive hall that extended up into the second story of the mansion with no separating floor, I spotted something that hadn't existed in my memory of 6 years ago. It was an awfully big portrait hanging right in front of the stairs that rose to the second floor. Without thinking, I stopped walking, captivated by it. Since I'd stopped so fast, Maria, who was following behind me, ran into my back.
ああ、悪い。なあ、ジェシカ。あんな絵、前はあったっけ？
I pointed at the big, prominently displayed portrait in the hall. Everyone else stopped too.
ああ、そっか。バトラが来てた頃にはあれはかけられてなかったっけ？いつからだったかな。
確か僕の記憶が正しければ一昨年あたりだったと思うよ。
さようでございます。一昨年の4月に親方様がかねてより画家に命じて描かせていたものをあそこに展示なされたのでございます。
So could this possibly be Beatrice?
あのじいさまがね、わざわざ描かせてか。
The portrait suited this Western mansion, and that woman in the elegant dress gave off a sense of refinement. I couldn't have guessed her age, but her sharp eyes and the strong will she seemed to possess made her look youthful. She seemed somehow different from the composed middle-aged woman you often see in famous pictures. If she'd had normal black hair, I might have assumed it was a portrait of my long-deceased grandmother in her prime. However, she had beautiful blonde hair and didn't look Japanese at all.
で、誰だい？このご婦人はよ。
Maria answered that simple question enthusiastically, as though proud she knew the answer. Called it!
ベア、なんだって？
ベアトリーチェ、魔女だよ。バトラ君は昔聞かされたことない？
魔女？って、この島の？
I think I already said this, but Rokkenjima is a small island, only 10 kilometers in circumference. However, that's actually pretty massive, considering that only the Ushiromiya family lives here. So, only the harbour and the area around the mansion were set up to be lived in. Beyond that, the island remained as untouched as when it was uninhabited. The vast and empty forest had absolutely no lights, phones, or people passing through. To understand how dangerous that is, you need to forget your common sense as a city dweller. After all, if you happened to fall down a hole in the depths of the forest and sprain your ankle, no one would come to save you, no matter how much you cried or screamed. Then, once the sun went down, the forest would be wrapped in complete darkness, since there were no streetlights. And, since there were no signs, it'd be easy to get lost and confused, losing your sense of direction inside that dark forest. Nowadays, most people see a forest as a peaceful place. But to the people of bygone eras, before the light of civilization drove out the night, forests were as geographically separated from civilization as the sea. They were oceans above the ground. Fishermen who go out in the ocean are putting their lives at risk, despite their technical knowledge. In the same way, hunters who go out to the forest are in danger, despite having specialized knowledge of their own. If children were to go play in such a dangerous forest, something terrible might happen. Someone's parents must have thought so. Maybe grandmother first said it, or maybe it was grandfather himself. Or perhaps the story's been passed down on this island since ancient times. There's a terrible witch in the forest, so you must not go in. At some point, this ghost story of Rokkenjima was born. This is the legend of Rokkenjima's witch. That's why, when we talk about a witch on this island, we're referring to the master of that vast and savage forest. Come to think of it, when I stayed at this mansion as a little kid during those eerie nights when the wind and rain pounded on the windows, I remember being terrified by a story of the forest witch, who roamed around searching for human sacrifices. So, Beatrice, huh? When Aniki mentioned it, I searched my memory and was sure I recalled hearing a name like that when I was little.
なるほどな。しかし、 あの魔女伝説の魔女にベアトリーチェなんておしゃれな名前がついてたとはとんと忘れてたぜ。じいさまめ、孫たちが信じないもんだからわざわざ絵に描きやがったか。
じいさまの妄想の中の魔女だよ。この絵を掲げた頃から現実と幻想の区別がつかなくなり始めた。私たちにとっては想像の中の魔女に過ぎないけど、じいさまにとっては彼女はこの島にいる存在。いる。だからそれを理解することができない私たちにもわかるようあの絵を描かせたって言うんだけど気持ち悪いったらありゃしないぜ。
お嬢様、親方様にとっては大切な肖像画です。親方様の前でそのようにおっしゃられることがございませんよう固く。
分かってるぜ。頼まれても言わねえよ。
Jessica glanced at the portrait with an irritated gaze before turning away.
行こうよ。食堂にみんなを待たせてるよ。
お腹すいた。
Only a small portion of this island was controlled by the Ushiromiya family. All of the lawless remainder was the domain of the witch, Beatrice. You might even call her the true ruler of Rokkenjima. I felt a faint revival of that unsettling sense of misfortune, which I felt when I learned of the tutelary god's shrine being struck by lightning. And I remembered that Kumasawa-san tried to tell an ominous story about Rokkenjima before Jessica stopped her. I don't know what she was planning to tell us about this island, but I do know one thing. It isn't the Ushiromiya family that rules Rokkenjima. It's the witch, Beatrice. That's right. After all, this is the witch's island. When I looked around, everyone was already heading towards the dining room. I hurriedly chased after them. Okay guys, well, that certainly took a slightly creepy turn. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. If you have, then don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more. And until next time guys, goodbye!